Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 6-game Major League Baseball slate. This is a pretty interesting slate considering the fact that it's only 6 games and we have a little bit of a later start at 7:40. There's no weather issues on this slate really, so that's good. Though the Colorado game could have some interesting temperatures and things like that. With that said, or Minnesota, sorry, Colorado, Minnesota. This game's in Minnesota. With that said, pitching is very rough today. We do have some guys that we like, but it's definitely a high risk, high reward type of slate from pitching perspective. I do expect a lot of teams score good amount of runs, and that will give a lot of fantasy upside to the batters today. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. So, Cease for the San Diego Padres looks interesting today, though he's only had one game over 20 fantasy points in the past 5 games. He's a little bit pricey for this one, but he is a GPP slash core play. He's not a must play because there's a couple other options that kind of fit in the same situation, but he's got the best K rate on the slate. At least he's tied for it, and he's got a good match against Oakland. Though I am concerned about him against Oakland because he does tend to give up some home runs, and Oakland can hit some home runs, and a couple of their batters are primed for that today. Looking at Logan Gilbert for Seattle, he's got a matchup here against the White Sox, who've been absolutely abysmal. Similar to San Diego situation, the White Sox have been inconsistent, but they do have a couple guys that get home runs, and Gilbert does have some risk there as well. He also has a decent K rate, a little bit lower than Dylan Case, but he definitely has some potential here. I do think that he ends up being okay, but he's only had one 20 fantasy point game in the past 6 games. Both these guys have really struggled to start the last few games, so these are good matchups for them to bounce back. But it's definitely carrying some risk. But if they get the strikeouts, they'll still be okay. But they just might end up giving up a couple home runs. Another guy to consider though is Carlos Rodon. Now he's got a tougher matchup against Kansas City, and I do like some Kansas City bats. But he's been more consistent lately than the other guys I've already mentioned. In fact, in the last 6 games, he's had 5 over 19 fantasy points, and his worst was 17.9. So I do think he's in a good spot here, but he definitely carries a little bit of risk because of the matchup being a bit tougher. But you can't argue too much with his history recently, and his price is a lot cheaper than the top 2 guys. He's also got the best K rate on the slate. He's tied with the other 2. So the other guys to consider today would be Barrios for Toronto. Now he's a boomer bust play because he's got a tough matchup with Milwaukee. He's had good games. He's had 4 19 fantasy point games in the past 6 or actually, I think 18 fantasy, well, close to that. You can see 17, 17, 17. But he definitely has some interesting potential today, though he definitely carries some risk. And he doesn't have the highest of strikeout rates on this slate, so he's a little bit harder to consider. But if you want to get some value, guys, these are kind of Hail Mary plays. Chris Paddock from Minnesota. He's got a favorable matchup with Colorado. Though again, there's one guy on Colorado that has a lot of upside today, McMahon, and so he definitely carries some risk there. But if he can get a decent amount of strikeouts, then he could pay off here. But he's only had 120 fantasy point game in the past 5, but he is cheap. Estes for Oakland is also somewhat interesting, though I do like San Diego a lot today. Estes has had some good games lately. He's not going to score, 25 fantasy points again, probably, but he definitely has that 15 fantasy point ability, though it is a risky situation. He could definitely be negative, so he's a Hail Mary play. And then Arrighetti for Houston. He's got a favorable matchup against San Francisco. He really just doesn't have that much of a high floor, but or high ceiling, but he has gotten some wins lately, and he has pitched pretty well in those. And he's not giving up home runs like some of the other pitchers on the slate. Though his K rate is low, it's going to be a little bit of he's definitely an extreme GP play at best, but he does have a little bit upside here. Let's go ahead and get into our bats now. So we have some interesting options across the board. Looking at catchers, we do have a few guys we like today. Salvador Perez for Kansas City, though he's in a tough matchup here. He definitely does have great metrics on this one. But Cal Raleigh does come in today as probably my favorite play at this position, simply because of his price at $4,200. He's the cheapest good option, at least at this point, for this slate. So he's definitely somebody to consider, though he has not been particularly great this season. Contreras from Milwaukee, though, does have great metrics, but he is extremely expensive, and he's going to be hard to roster as a result. Danny Jansen is also interesting for Toronto as well, if you want to get the other side of this game, as he has had some good games lately, but he definitely carries some contrarian risk as well. Looking at first base is where I get some really good options here. Luis Arias looks absolutely fantastic today. Obviously, he's not a home run hitter, but he's getting multi-hit potential. He's been hitting the ball pretty well so far since he's joined San Diego, and he looks to continue that here in a positive matchup against Oakland's pitching, who's been absolutely abysmal. So I do think he's got a lot of upside here. Vlad Jr. is also interesting for Toronto. He does carry a little bit of risk today at his price, and he's not been as good as we'd like this season, but he definitely has upside on this slate. And Jake Bowers from Milwaukee is a good one-off for there as well at this position that's cheaper. He's got some good metrics for this game, and he's definitely worth a look. Looking at second base, we do like a couple guys here. One being Jake Cronenworth for San Diego. He's probably my favorite play at this position, and he definitely draws a lot of potential on this one. He's got really good metrics, and he's nicely priced. Altuve's in play, but he definitely doesn't have the best metrics as he's had lately. He had a couple games in a row where he's really good, but this game kind of comes back to normal. But I still think he's got a lot of upside if you can afford him. Two contrarian options here: Willie Castro for Minnesota. I do like Minnesota today, but they do carry some high risk, high reward. And then Dylan Moore for Seattle, also kind of high risk, high reward, Hail Mary type plays. Looking at third base, Royce Lewis started his first couple games with home runs. The last 3 games, he hasn't done as much, but his metrics are absolutely fantastic today, so he's definitely worth a look, though he is very expensive. Miguel Garcia, though, he really does draw good metrics for this game. He has a lot of upside and some good potential here for a good game. Vlad Jr. can also play here at third. And then for a cheap option, Seattle's Rojas. He looks really good today. He's not a huge home run hitter, but he does have multi-hit potential. Even though he struggled lately and he has only had a couple at-bats in some of the games, he does draw some cheap upside on the slate. Looking at third base, sorry, I got 2 other guys you can mention here. Willie Castro, sorry, not Willie Castro. Dylan Moore and Ryan McMahon are kind of contrarian options at third as well. Looking at shortstop, Jeremy Pena jumps off the page as the top overall play at this position. He's been hitting the ball pretty good lately. He has a lot of upside, and while his fantasy points have been inconsistent, he has good potential today with the best metrics at this position. Bobby Witt Jr. has been absolutely fantastic so far this season, and he draws another good matchup here, but it's a little bit riskier, and he's very expensive. And then Crawford for Seattle is a good option here, as well as a cheap option. If you want to be contrarian from Pena, then he does draw good metrics for this game, and I like Seattle a little bit here as well. So let's go ahead and look at our outfielders. Before I do that, though, I wanted to mix in my top plays here. Larnach for Minnesota, Bliss for Seattle. He's also a kind of a not Bliss. I'm sorry. He's a sub $3,000 play, but and then what was the other? Oh. Yeah, Larnach is my core play right now. So let's look at our outfielders. So I'm going to pull this sheet over here so that we can look at it this way. So Aaron Judge, Christian Yelich, Darian Blanco, and Max Kepler all carry really top-tier metrics today. I do like all these guys, and they all are in good situations, though obviously Judge and Yelich are expensive. Larnach for Minnesota, Alvarez, Buxton, and Varsho. I really do like Minnesota a lot. They are probably my favorite team to stack. And Larnach is nicely priced and has really good upside on this one. So he's definitely a core play for me. But I do like Buxton and Varsho as well, though they're contrarian. I still like Kepler and Blanco a little bit better. Looking at the next set of group here with McCormick, Verdugo, Castro, and Springer, these are all guys you could kind of just one-off and choose any of them, and they definitely have some good metrics here. And then for Michael Conforto, Dubon, Myers, and Yastrzemski, they're all good one-off options to fill in that final position spot if you need. So let's look at our stacks here. For Minnesota, Lewis, Larnach, Correa, and then for a 3-team stack, Lewis, Larnach, Correa, but a 4-team stack would add Kepler, and a 5-team stack would add either Castro, Miranda, or Santana. This stack is very good. I think it's going to be pretty popular today, but it's definitely worth a look. For the Yankees, Judge, Verdugo, Stanton, LeMayo, and Wells. I mean, this stack looks really good. If Soto comes back, then he would definitely be in play too as a contrarian play from Judge, but I do think it's a viable way to go. Looking at Seattle, Canzone and Bliss, they're cheap, and they both have a lot of upside on the slate, and so they are definitely top of that. And then you could just pick 3 of these last 5 guys here, or 6 guys here, rather. I think Rojas, Raleigh, and then either Crawford or Rayleigh are probably the top overall ways to go just to make it cheap, but you could move in Rodriguez as well. Looking at San Diego, Arraez, Tatis, Profar, and then either Cronenworth, Merrill, Solano, or Kim. I do like Cronenworth a lot, and Merrill and Solano. I think Kim's probably the one-off guy that you could probably ignore. But for Kansas City, Witt Jr., Pascuanto, Perez, and Garcia, four-team stack, and then add Velasquez if you want to go five, but you don't have to there. For Houston, Alvarez, Myers, Altuve, Pena, and Diaz. There's basically five guys that look really good and four guys that don't look that great, and that's kind of where that fits. For Milwaukee, Contreras, and then Yelich or Bowers. If you want to save some money, go with Bowers, Adalmays, Hoskins, and Ortiz. I really like Hoskins a lot today. And then Toronto, Vlad Jr., Jansen, Schneider, Springer, and Horwitz. Kind of a Hail Mary play at the end there, but it's cheap. And then for San Francisco, Bailey, Conforto, Chapman, Ramos, and Soler. Really solid stack there as well. Looking at the bottom three stacks, these are definitely Hail Mary stacks, but we have a lot of ways we can mix these guys in. For Colorado, you could just do a one-player stack with McMahon, and that would look really good. Or a two-player stack, or three, sorry, with McMahon, Blackman, and Doyle. Or you could add Diaz and Tovar if you want to go full crazy there. If Colorado was to go off, though, then that would definitely be very good for fantasy aspect if you use them. Looking at Oakland, Roker and Langerlays look like the best two options for home runs, though I do think Bleday and Sharman have a little bit of upside, and then Andujar or Toro do have a little upside on the end. For the Chicago White Sox, the home run hitters are Jokes, Roberts, and Sheets today. DeJong, Vaughn, and then Lee, DeJong looks okay, and then Vaughn, Lee, or Colas is a fifth option, but I think a three-team stack here is probably the most you want to go there. So from a top overall metrics spot here, Judge, Witt Jr., Ryan Bliss, who's going to be cheap today, and Larnach all look the top overall hitters in general. And then Salvador Perez, Brent Rooker, Vlad Jr., Jordan Alvarez, Tatis Jr., Yelich, and Profar all look really good on the other end of that. I think Profar is a guy that I'm probably going to make a core play as well, simply because he's got just fantastic metrics today. But he definitely isn't a must play because of his price and his positioning, honestly. Looking at Judge as home run upside guys, Judge, Robert, Rooker, and Witt. If you want to go with the guys that have home run hitting against the top tier pitching, Robert and Rooker are definitely the way to go. But some other home run options are Perez, Toglia, Shea Langerlays, Rice Hoskins, who looks really solid today for that. Stanton, Jordan Alvarez, Trevor Larnach, and Dominic Canzone, which I really like Canzone and Bliss as kind of part of as part of a cheap way to get some more expensive options here. They're both sub 3,000 plays, and they're probably the best sub 3,000 plays on this entire slate. So I do think that's a way to look at it. But they're not must plays, just to be clear. I'm just showing how that would look. So if you went with like Rodon and then either Gilbert or I would probably say Gilbert since you're going to use some Seattle options, but you could kind of do this and you still have $4,300 left over if you wanted to go that route. So that's definitely a way to go to help you pay up in other positions. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below.